Welcome to another episode of MFRW Bayside Chats, where we honor and highlight the accomplishments of Republican women in Maryland. Today's guest, we have the Honorable Ellen Sauerbrey, who is a former state delegate, former minority leader in the House, former national committee woman for the Maryland GOP, former two-time gubernatorial nominee, former assistant secretary of state for population, refugees, and migration. She's also the ambassador to the UN on women's issues, former national chair of ALEC, and former chairman of the Maryland Business for Responsive Government. So thank you so much for being with us today. I'm very excited for the interview.
It is my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be fun.
Yes, ma'am. So, Ellen, again, thank you for being here today. First question, you were born in Baltimore, and you stayed in Maryland all this time. So what made you stay?
All my roots are here. Very soon after being educated here, didn't take long before I found my way into politics. And of course, getting more and more involved in Maryland affairs, Maryland organizations. Why would I leave? I went to Western Maryland College, which is now called McDaniel, and I was a biology major, and I really had always wanted to be a veterinarian. I love animals, and unfortunately, my parents did not have the resources to be able to barely get me through college, much less veterinary school. So my father said, well, why don't you teach for a while and then earn some money and then you can go on to veterinary school. Well, instead, I got married. So that ended that idea, but I did enjoy teaching. And my husband is a first generation American. His mother was from West Germany and his father was from East Germany, and he didn't know any of his family. So he took off a summer from work, and of course I was off from teaching, and we spent a summer in Europe, mostly in Germany, in a country that was divided by a wall. And I had the opportunity to, for the first time in my life, understand what the word freedom means and how people on two sides of a wall, the same ethnic people, behave so differently. And it really, it made a tremendous impact on me. I have to say, before that, I hadn't given two thoughts to politics. I came home looking around and thinking, little things that I was seeing that I was not comfortable with in our country. And so I decided I should get more involved and learn more. And I joined the League of Women Voters. Well, it didn't take me more than 1 year as a member of the League of Women Voters to decide this is not where I belong. And so then at that point I had decided to stop teaching, and then got more and more involved in political activity.
Let's talk a little bit about your time in the House of Delegates and as minority leader. So what was the minority party like when you were leader?
Well, before I get there, I have to tell you how I got there.
Yes, ma'am, of course.
I was chairing and doing a lot of work for a delegate named George Price, who represented northern Baltimore County. And George decided to run for the Senate. And I had been, at that point for many years, working in the vineyards, as they say. So the question at the first meeting was, well, who's going to run for George's seat? And I can tell you, it had never ever entered my mind, because I like to run campaigns. I had been campaign manager for a bunch of different campaigns. And all of a sudden everybody's pointing at me. And I came home and I said, my husband, I think I should run for the House of Delegates. And he said, well, why not? I'm sure you know as much about it at this point, because I had been working on bills and so on in Annapolis. And so I decided, I think I'll do it. So I go to the Central Committee chairman in Baltimore County. I won't tell you his name because I don't want to embarrass his family. And I said, I'm thinking about running for the House of Delegates, and I would really like your support. And he said, I can't support you. You're a woman. You can't win in that district. Well, that was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. And I said, you son of a gun, I'm going to show you. And I knocked on doors from May until November, nonstop. And I won the primary, and I won the general, and that's how I got to Annapolis. I was in the legislature for 8 years, and then became minority leader for the second 8 years, so a total of 16 years that I was in Annapolis. And what really happened was a group of the males in the House Republican caucus asked me to run because I was aggressive and because I really would stand up and fight for the things that I thought the Republicans ought to be standing for. And there was a little bit of a tendency at that time, well, if we just keep quiet and we don't make the Democrats mad, we can get our bill passed. And that was getting us nowhere. So I decided to run for minority leader, and I did win. And as far as I know, I'm the only woman that has been minority leader in Maryland, and it was with with the support of the men in the caucus. And I was very fortunate. I had such a unified caucus, and we grew because we started taking strong positions. I had said, as long as we just sit there and get our little bill passed, why would anybody vote for Republicans? They don't know who we are, what we're about. So we became pretty vocal. And I was also it was my honor, really, that the caucus allowed me to speak for the caucus without having to come back and get approval on stands. And that really allowed us to be out front and in the forefront. And we started picking up seats, and I really believe it's because we started really standing for something. And I think that's a lesson today. We need to be vocal, we need to know what we believe in, and we need to get out there and fight for it and not hide under a rock because we might make somebody mad. And I will never forget, there was a bill, I can't remember the name of it anymore, but it was a very important bill. And we decided it was not a good bill. It was an economic bill that was putting government into running the economy. So for over a week, we kept holding that bill up, holding it up, offering amendments, holding it up. And do you know what the Sun paper was reporting? It was reporting on what was going to be the Maryland flower. They were totally ignoring us. And I went to the reporter one day and I said, why aren't you reporting on this? This is an important issue. And his response to me was, you Republicans can't get anything passed. And that remains a problem to this day. I know we have Republicans who are down there fighting on issues and they get no coverage because the attitude of the newspaper is, well, you're a minority, so you're not going to get anything done. And that's really aggravating. But I can still remember the first year that I was in the legislature. We literally met in a phone booth. I mean, there were so few of us that we just, and at that time there was no caucus room. We met in the basement. We have come a long way.
Yes.
We got up to 50, and that was I think as a result of the Republicans really starting to fight. We also started having a fundraiser and I set a goal that we were going to raise $100,000 and we were going to use it to elect more Republicans. We were not raising that money to help ourselves. And that was kind of a shock to some of the members. But we did. We actually raised a sizable amount of money. We started interviewing, this actually after I was minority leader, we started Bob Kittleman, my dear friend, and I would interview candidates, and they had to show us their plan, they had to show us their budget, how they were raising money, and then we actually decided this person may be very nice, but we're not giving them money because they're not going to be a good candidate. They have no strategy to win. And that helped a lot with helping people who were running for the first time to get their foot in the door.
Can you talk about some of the policies or bills you submitted in your time in Annapolis?
Well, I was always fighting to cut government spending and education choice. I know that the first bill that was introduced on school choice was my bill. I also introduced a bill that became reality, not because it was me, because my bill got killed, but I was approached by someone about the idea of to help cut down on drunk driving. It was called Mission Interlock, which meant that when you turned the key on, you had to blow into a device. This was only for people who had a drunk driving history. They had to put this on their car, and they had to blow into it. And if they had an alcohol content, the car wouldn't start. So I can remember introducing the bill and thinking, this is a great idea. And the chairman looks at me and he says, "Mrs. Sauerbrey, where do you get these crazy ideas?" Needless to say, the bill didn't go anywhere that year, but it didn't take but about 2 years, and a Democrat introduced it, and guess what? It passed. But the most interesting experience I probably had with the bill, and it was actually my first year. So I'm a freshman delegate, and I introduced a bill to remove the sales tax on farm machinery. My bill was probably number 100 or something, one of the very early bills. It comes out of committee. It's on the floor, and I am so excited until a Democrat stands up, the chairman of the committee stands up and says, "Mr. Speaker, we would like to re-refer this bill to committee." And I'm thinking, what on earth happened? Well, what happened was the governor had introduced bill number 3001 or whatever to do the same thing. And somebody said, "Hey, you can't allow freshman Republican to get credit for this." So they pulled the bill, and of course about a week later the bill comes back on the floor, and it's been amended to be the governor's bill, and they were nice enough to make me a co-sponsor of the bill. But this is the kind of thing. One of the things that I was probably most proud of was the spending limit bill. That was a bill that I worked so hard on, and I was in my second year at that time, and Frank Kelly, who at that time, Senator Kelly was the senator from this district, and we really worked very well together. He introduced the same bill on the Senate side, but I had gone around to businesses. I had major businesses that were promoting this. We put out all kinds of things, and what the bill said was the budget can't grow faster than the income of the people. So if personal income has grown by 6%, the budget can't grow by 10, or you will have to tax people more. And that bill became, for 2 sessions, that bill became one of the most hotly contested bills. We got that bill out of committee. We got it out of committee by having an army of people harassing a delegate named Frank Pesce from Prince George's County. And the chairman of the budget committee had no clue that Frank Pesce had flipped his vote. And he was always waiting to make sure that he had his votes before he ever got the bill out of the drawer and voted on it. So he brings it up, and Frank Pesce votes for the bill. Well, this created major havoc. And I can tell you that they organized a campaign to go to every delegation and say, if this bill passes, this is going to happen to your county. You're not going to get this. You're not going to get that. So when the bill finally came up for a vote on the floor, they had managed by that point to kill it. But the issue had become so hot that they had to do something. So they referred it to study. And it was studied, and what came out was a very watered down version of the bill. But that was probably my biggest cause in the whole time I was in Annapolis, was trying to get that kind of a limit to keep the government from being able to take more and more and more out of our pockets. And of course, now we're looking at this huge tax increase.
So, ma'am, you've held many roles across every different level of government, private sector, public sector. Which has been your favorite or most impactful?
Well, they've been very different. Obviously, I loved Maryland and I loved the legislature. When I did not succeed in the governor's race, I was really very honored when President Bush actually gave me 3 different assignments at the UN. First one was the Commission on the Human Rights Commission. That was dreadful. That was dreadful because most of the members of the Human Rights Commission are the human rights abusers. So I'm not even going to talk about that. The next one was the Commission on the Status of Women. And I traveled all over the world working with women's issues. I actually was in Mongolia teaching women how to wave signs. Can you believe I took sign waving from Maryland to several Russian, former Russian countries? And the logic for that was these were women who had very little to no resources. So, they couldn't go out and buy radio time or put up billboards. And I convinced them that they thought this sounded insane, but that for them to do sign waving was a great way to get their message out. I always wanted to go back in an election year and see to what degree they were actually sign waving. But no, the Commission on the Status of Women meant a lot to me because I really had no idea, as most American women have no idea, what it is like to be a woman in so many parts of the world where there is no education opportunity, where they can't be property, they have no property rights. That became one of my real passions, was promoting women's property rights. If you can't, and I remember the story of a woman that I met who, when her husband died, and she had several children. Her husband's, their property, what should have been their mutual property, did not go to her. It went to his brother. I worked with trafficking women who had been trafficked. Horrible, horrible stories. Women who had been raped as a part of warfare. Women who had had acid thrown in their faces. Women who had been the victims of honor killings, that the man that did the killing didn't even go to jail. I mean, that was just tolerated. So going to countries where we could really try to promote American values, that women need to be educated, that a country cannot prosper if half the population is suppressed and has no rights. So that was very meaningful. I never dreamed I would end up as Assistant Secretary of State. And Condoleezza, I had always said, I don't want to be in Congress. I don't want to go to Washington. And Condi Rice called me and asked me if I would consider a position. And boy, that was something I couldn't say no to. And that was primarily dealing with refugees. I'm really very upset with what's going on today, because it is so diminishing what we thought was wonderful work that we were doing on people who were legitimate refugees. Not bringing them to the United States. Only a very, very small percent came to the United States. But we worked, I had 120 people on my staff, and incidentally had the largest budget of any department in the State Department. Had a $2 billion budget at that time. And it was humanitarian. And it was things like the refugees from Burma who were in Thailand. It was refugees in many African countries. I have so many stories I could tell you, but I know we'd be here all day. But going to refugee camps, and what the United States was trying to do as part of an agreement that we had with other countries around the world to help refugees to try to prevent chaos, because ultimately it lands on our shore as well as it does on other countries, Western countries. And what we would do would go into these places and try to create the conditions that refugees could survive. In some cases, it was working with the country that the refugees had fled to ensure that they had sanitary conditions, that they had food. We worked with the World Food Bank and other organizations. But again, Americans we're so blessed. We are so blessed. And it breaks my heart that we have so many people who think this is a terrible country, because we have done so much to help people around the world. And in some cases, the ones that I had some great stories of refugees that we did bring into this country, but they were only brought in after intense background checks, intense training. I can remember sitting in on a class of people that had come from one of the African countries. They didn't know what a telephone was. They had no idea of what they were going to be dealing with. And the United States government was doing training before these people came to the United States. And what's happening today is just destroying the whole concept of of a legitimate refugee population.
We've talked a lot about your roles and positions you've held, but I want to shift gears and talk about your gubernatorial race. So when you ran in 1994, what made you want to run for governor?
After 16 years in the House and being a thorn in the side of, of the Democrats, it was getting to a point that when I stood up on the floor, there was going to be a prepared Democrat ready to come in and shoot me down. And I got to a point that I realized I can't get anything done. And if I really want to get things done, how can I do it? And again, it was a troop of Republican caucus members who came and said, you need to run, we need a good candidate. You need to run for governor. Well, that was a very intimidating idea, but I had a lot of support. And we held some early events to gauge whether there was a path, and we decided there was a path. And I will remember, after being a very noisy minority leader for 8 years, we did the first poll, and my name identification statewide was 3%. That was not encouraging, but I had a lot of people that started immediately sending checks, and actually the first larger check that I got was from Larry Hogan Sr., Dad, who I was very fond of. It was a phenomenal experience, and I got to see things and do things that most people never have a chance to do statewide. Go to businesses, go to all kinds of institutions and clubs and meet great people and make friends. I had some wonderful members of the Federation who were my home away from home. People like Ann Granados, who's no longer with us in Ocean City, Joan Beck, Jane Plank, Kathy Hargett. I'm very proud of the fact that we built a phenomenal grassroots team and worked very, very hard and won a primary unexpectedly over Congresswoman Helen Bentley, and shocked the Democrats because everyone was anticipating that they were going to be running against Helen Bentley. And those last couple of months, because at that time the primary was in September, those last couple months of the campaign were insane, with being just out all day long, every day. And when the votes were counted on election night, we had our party at the Timonium Fairgrounds. When the election night votes started coming in, I was winning. The head of the Board of Elections in Baltimore City told the governor that I had won. They sent the state troopers to my house, to the location, and I had state troopers posted in my driveway for 3 days, I believe. And at around 10 o'clock at night, the votes stopped coming in from Baltimore City, and my chairman at that time, an attorney, went down to the election board, and they had no idea why the votes weren't coming in. But about midnight, I was up on the stage, everyone screaming and so excited because I'm leading significantly. And I hear, because the woman is right with me, I hear her say, like, 8,000 votes for Glendenning and none for Sauerbrey? How could that be? Well, all of a sudden, votes were coming in from somewhere. And so it ultimately, I lost. had more people after the election wanting to help because there were so many stories that people did not believe that it was a fair election. And at any rate, ultimately it was getting too close to inauguration. People wanted me to go to federal court, and it wasn't gonna. I could see it needed to be brought to a conclusion. So I finally conceded, and then spent the next 4 years preparing to run again. And in the meantime, I was the radio host on WBAL, night radio host, talk show host, which was a lot of fun. And I was national committee woman during that time, and then ran again. The second time, I know I lost. The first time, I know I won. Unfortunately, I didn't get to serve. There were times when, after Bob Ehrlich was elected, that I would see how the Democrats wouldn't let any of the bills, anything he wanted to do, get accomplished. And there were times that I thought, maybe God spared me.
You have been a lifetime member of the Republican Women of Baltimore County because you yourself founded the Republican Women of Baltimore County. So can you talk a little bit about that, of how it was, starting the chapter, and now it's one of our largest chapters in the MFRW?
There after my early days of getting involved politically, I had run a precinct for Goldwater, came out of that, and then I was so hyped up and so excited that we had to change America, and nobody responded when I called and volunteered. And that's a problem. And I knocked on doors and sort of had a hard time finding anybody that was interested in new volunteers. So I did find that there was such a thing as the Maryland Federation of Republican Women, but we didn't have a club in our area. So there were a handful of us, maybe 5 or 6, that met one day at Jane Jackson's house, and we had Sylvia Herman, who was at that time the National Committee woman, come over from Montgomery County and tell us about how we could start a club. So we started the club, and we called it the GOP Hers, the Gophers. And it was the GOP Hers until the few years that I couldn't attend because I was under the Hatch Act when I was at the State Department. And it was while I was not there to fight back they decided that the name GOP Hers didn't sound professional enough. So they changed it to Republican Women of Baltimore County. But in the early days of our club, we met in people's houses, maybe 15 or 20 people. And we started out kind of being self-education. We would assign somebody to be the speaker at the next meeting, one of us. And that was a great way, really, for people to learn the issues. The person who was presenting was an expert on it by the time the meeting came around. And we'd have dessert and coffee, and it was my opinion that you had to have 2 things to be successful. You had to have fun, you had to have camaraderie, but you also had to have people go home thinking that they had learned something, that there was something positive that they got out of the meeting. And the club slowly grew. As I said, for the period that I was at the State Department, which was, 6 years, I was not able to be involved, although I did get to be a speaker one time with permission at one of the other clubs. And now I'm very proud of our club. We've had very, very strong presidents. I was president back in the days that it was a small club. and now we have about 200 members between our associate and full-time members. And gosh, I'm back to the grassroots, right where I started. I love the grassroots. I love working with people, telling everybody I meet, if you're not a Republican, if you're a Republican woman, why aren't you a member of our club? And so anyway, our club is going strong. We have great speakers, and I think we're a significant part of the MFRW.
You had alluded this to before when we were talking about your gubernatorial race. Can you just name some of the Republican women who've really made an impact on your career in politics or have been there as mentors for you?
Oh, absolutely. Audrey Scott at the top of the list. Audrey was so important to me when I ran for governor in Prince George's County. Katja Bullock, what a loss that she's not with us anymore. Ann Granados in Ocean City. Joan Beck was great. Joan worked in my office when I was minority leader, by the way, and Joan opened her house and helped a great deal in Anne Arundel County. Kathy Hargett helped me in so many ways, including going and buying suits. She'd buy 3 suits and bring them home for me to try on, so I looked decent as a candidate. Dee Hodges was very important in working with policy. In fact, Dee was the one that really took hold of the issue that propelled my first race for governor, which was that we believed that we could cut the personal income tax by 40%. And we actually developed a budget to demonstrate how that was possible. Jane Plank. Jane gave me the key to her house, that any time I needed a place in Montgomery County to catch a breath, I could go to Jane's house. Just without the Republican women, I would not have even known how to get started. I remember having a fundraiser when I was actually running the first time. We had at least twice we had fashion shows. I don't think they do them anymore, but we had fashion shows, and we had Ted Agnew's wife, Judy, and the wives of some of the other elected officials at that time. Doris Bishop, I remember, as models in the fashion show, and made small amounts of money, but enough to help me get through that first race for the legislature. So women have always been a big part, and we had a group here in Baltimore County that they called themselves, and my nickname was Winky. Most everybody knew me as Winky until I ran for office, and they told me that was not good to have on the ballot. I had to get people to learn that my name was Ellen. But they called themselves Winky's Willing Wednesday Women Workers. And they gathered every Wednesday and worked on signing brochures and folding brochures. I remember this one wonderful lady who said, "If I have to look at your smiling face one more time, I'm going to throw up." But without the help of Republican women, my campaign would never have gone anywhere.
Well, you have, again, led an amazing life and a very impactful career. Do you have any last-minute advice for future female leaders and candidates within the Republican Party?
I would say, number one, you really need to know the issues, and you really have to have a firm foundation of what you believe in, and you have to be able to articulate it in a convincing way. Number two, I'd say you have to be a risk taker. Women tend not to run for office because they're not sure how they would raise the money. They don't know, how they would break into the good old boy network. You have to be willing to be a risk taker. knock on doors. I tell everyone that runs for office that I can reach. The most important thing that you can do, first of all, you can't run for the top office. You need to start somewhere. You need to get your foot on the bottom rung of the ladder and then climb. So look for a chance to run for a county council seat or a state legislative seat and build your base. And while you're building that, join every organization in your community that you can be a part of, because you have to have some level of name identification and some level of people that think you're qualified that will make up your campaign. Stick to your guns and don't be afraid.
Well, thank you, Ellen, for an amazing interview. This has been another episode of MFRW Bayside Chats, produced by the Maryland Federation of Republican Women. Tune in to the next episode.